Good evening. I'm Bill Oglesby, the professor for the documentary capstone class at VCU's Robertson School of Media and Culture. And I want to welcome you to VCU InDepth, which spotlights student mini documentaries produced by students who, this semester at least, got a good taste of the challenges that can come when producing a documentary. As we all know, society basically shut down in March, which was right in the middle of their semester. Suddenly there were no more in-person interviews to be done, no more using university equipment to edit. As the current saying goes, however, they persisted. Now please keep in mind the limitations they faced when you're watching the documentaries they managed to produce. Our first mini documentary tonight relates to a common challenge in times of pandemic and quarantine, finding connection with others. In Make the World a Safe Space, student producers Trevor Mitchell, Nicholas Smith, and Ryan Yurka explore a community bound by music and the determination of the transgender individuals who create it.
Damn, that's their first mistake.
And trans people?
Oh God, what a disaster.
The beginning of it was there is like no like gender lines. Like that was the first thing that I think I realized, is that like whatever people have tried to get me to be, like I don't want to do that thing. And so I didn't really know what I was for like a couple of years, and I was fine with that. And then I had a couple like key people in my life at like a key time in my life who began to like, I don't even know if they realized it, but their like behavior and how they treated me made me feel more of like traditionally like femme in a lot of ways. And so I started to like, that idea started to roll around in my head, and it wasn't even necessarily something that I was like looking for or like actively thinking about. I would say that there's been a lot of times in my life where I've actively thought the opposite way to try and protect myself from an idea that scared me. But at this point, I was just more generally open to things, so I kind of started to explore that idea, and immediately so many things changed. It was a big difference in my life before and after I decided to become okay with that idea. It's almost like each new day there's like a new memory that I'm seeing in a different way. And it's kind of definitely a strange experience to have your childhood reframed for you as you decide to kind of like figure out who you are. Like one thing I used to do in middle school was I would just wear really tight-fitting clothing all the time. And people would always be like, yeah, that doesn't fit you, like that's not how it's supposed to fit. And I never, I don't think I realized why until later, that it just like made me feel more feminine, and that's why I like doing that.
Shows have always been like I don't know, I'm not good at sports, and like I never liked sports, so yeah, it was just like a good way to like, you know, hang out with your friends and have something really in common, and like a common bond that everybody could get with. Well, I'm bisexual and pansexual, and I've known that for a very long time, like since I was like 12, 13. But I would say that I'm gender fluid and non-binary, because I don't really know. Like usually they, them is cool, sometimes she, her is cool, like. But also, since I grew up he, him, like a cis male for most of my life, there's this weird level of not really comfort, but like familiarity that sometimes like I feel like I've been forced into. And so sometimes like it works for me, but it doesn't. So yeah, I just don't really know what I am.
I've identified as gender fluid since I was probably 16. I don't know, I use all the pronouns in all of my music, and like I'll talk about like relationships with men and relationships with women from like a male and female perspective. Yeah, it's kind of just inherent in anything I write because it's a big part of who I am, you know? Laura Jane Grace from Against Me is coming out was like a huge awakening for me because I realized when I was like 6 and 7, putting on dresses as like a bit might have been more than a bit, you know? So like her coming out and like putting a name to it really helped me identify that. And you know, dealing with like depression and stuff when I was like 16, I was always like, I would just feel so much better if I could just like wear makeup and do my nails and like wear dresses and stuff like that.
I was like way more down with wearing a dress and makeup than I ever thought I would be. Like I felt really comfortable. Like I remember going into work the next day, and I just worked at a shoe store, and I showed all my coworkers, I'm like, here's a picture of me in a dress. Like my friend did my makeup for me, and like they were really supportive. Like everybody was really cool. New Paltz's like a really cool town with that stuff.
When I moved to Charleston to do shows, I was 18. I was like fresh out of high school, and I only had like 3 cis friends. So like it was really cool to like get to, I don't know, just be surrounded by people who felt like me, you know what I mean? And like who like were like so like supportive of like any identity I'd have. Yeah, and then I moved to Huntington, it was the same thing, you know, I always played in like queer bands, like with like a queer-centric message, and like, yeah, it's been like immensely supportive. And then going on tour has been the same thing. It's like, I play with a lot of queer bands, and I meet a lot of queer people, and I'll just like talk to like strangers about queer stuff, and it's like cool to just like, I don't know, meet people who think similarly, you know?
Where I'm at is all things, whether it's gender relations, race relations, class relations. It's all about education, and I think people need to be more accepting and more helping people learn rather than keeping people out if they don't get it. Because most of the time people are ignorant because they never learned or never experienced that. I'm a high school teacher. I am a social studies teacher. I teach 9th and 11th grade in a public school in New York City. The community that I teach in Harlem, there's not a lot of trans students. There was only one, and he left. So I think a lot of people just don't experience this stuff all the time. So I think like the DIY community is really accepting of stuff that is part of the scene. So like there are a lot of trans people in the scene. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of friends that have a similar experience to mine. I think like we need to branch out this scene and like help the artists that are trans become more mainstream so that not just our community sees those artists, but broader communities. I don't know, the way I view it is I love having a safer space with the shows, and I think the goal of a safer space is to make the safer space so big that we don't need safer spaces because the world is just like a safer space.
This is the last night of a very long tour.
So I took a big risk in my life, and I stopped having a real job. Had to ask off for Fest, hurt my back, and called out, and then they stopped putting me on the schedule, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to fight for it, and I'm not going to get another job because I'm going to be a musician. So I went on, I played bass for Mississippi, and that went great. In the middle of the Mississippi tour, I got asked to do a full US with Adult Mom, which was a dream come true. I've always wanted to do a full US. I've never been to the West Coast. This tour was hitting all those places, and I was just like, holy shit. So I, of course, said yes, and we went, and it was great. And then we hit the West Coast. We were in Los Angeles, and things are going bad. The virus is getting worse and worse. We played San Francisco was the last date we had that we played, and we were on our way to the next one in Portland, Oregon, I think. And we got news that that show was canceled, and we're like, okay, it sucks, but we'll see what's up. And then we got news the next one was, and then we got news that the whole thing was canceled. I remember my first live stream was so strange. I never like streamed before. I guess like one thing that like people need when they're at home like doing nothing or doing chores is some art form, which could be like television or movies or music, and luckily I do one of those things, so maybe people have enjoyed my music while they're in the quarantine. It's weird. It really sucks that I can't have band practice, so Padfoot is really suffering from that. because we all get stir crazy easy. Kimball hits me up all the time. He's like, "Hey, let me know when you want to break quarantine." And I'm like, "You'll be the first to know." But I live with my mom, so I can't really go out. I live with my mom and Anna, and it's just like I don't want to put any of them at risk. So it's weird. It's rough. I hate it.
I started doing music a little bit in high school, but it was mostly just kind of like bedroom pop type stuff, and none of it was really that good. But then when I came to college, I started going to DIY shows for the first time. I was introduced to the community, and I thought it was super cool. And I was like, I want to do this. This looks like fun. Showwave is a independent record label focused around bands in the DIY scene. We do tape releases, cassette tape releases, and recently vinyl releases for bands that we work with. It started off as a YouTube channel that would just showcase music in the DIY scene and the emo scene. Gained a pretty large following. I think we are up to like 12,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So now it's just kind of grown into this legitimate label that I'm not only super happy to be a part of, but super happy to do work for and work on releases for other bands as well. DIY is probably one of the only spaces I've ever seen where trans people can like not only put themselves out there, but they also kind of like have the not quite but almost equal opportunity to flourish. I see a lot of trans non-binary people in bands that have done really well for themselves, which is really cool. The fact that they're able to get that sort of platform and they talk about such important issues is really cool. And I do think that there is sort of like a community among trans people, especially like in DIY. So definitely one thing that I've been seeing that I think is really cool is all of these live stream shows. Showwave is actually going to do one with a couple of the bands from our roster. I think is a really neat idea, and it's a really cool way for bands to be able to interact with fans as well, because they have like the live chat function that goes as they're playing. It's a little bit limiting because it's really hard, or at least really inaccessibly expensive to have a good setup for full bands recording.
So we were in Pittsburgh practicing before our first show, which was March 8th. It was March 6th, I remember. And that was the day South by canceled. So we were practicing, and someone gets the notification on their phone. They just stopped playing, and they're like, "Yo, South by's canceled." And we're like, "Come the on." Like, we heard about coronavirus happening, but like none of us took it seriously because it wasn't how it is now yet. So we're just like, whatever, like, wash your hands, you'll be fine. And then we heard like Facebook dropped out of South by, the Beastie Boys dropped out of South by. We're like, all right, they're just overreacting. Like, it's fine. It's going to be fine. Everything's still going to happen. And then when we heard it canceled, we were like, let's just do the tour. Let's go. Who cares? You know, official South by, it doesn't interrupt unofficial South by, so who cares? Let's go. So we are going, and of course, as each day is going on, it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse, like the updates. And the first show was March 8th. I think we had to call it by March 13th. So we weren't on the road for very long before we had to turn around and go home. No More Dysphoria is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that I had started back in 2015, 2016. Our major focus and our goal is to help trans and binary people pay for different parts of their transitions. I started going to shows so long ago, so it's just always been something in my forefront, you know, for years, for as long as I can imagine. Like, band makes music, aka product, and then band must market product, and they do so by making these various different things with their name on it. And maybe if you're funny, you'll get that product out there a lot faster. And then like, you tour, and you eat for all these years, and you play all these shows to nobody and carry your amps downstairs. And it's like, all of it is for a purpose, because if you get one person to like your band, hopefully that person will go tell their friend about it, and then that friend will like it, and they'll go tell their friend about it. And then before you know it, you know, word of mouth spreads fast enough, and you got yourself, you know, free marketing without even trying very simply. So taking all that into consideration, I was like, how do I make a nonprofit kind of work similarly to a band, since that's like the only path of how to get yourself known that I know of. So I was just like, well, I'll just make the two coexist. So No More Dysphoria has been heavily, you know, involved with music and bands, and we set up a table to sell merch at different shows. And a lot of bigger bands have invited me to come to their shows and sell stuff at their shows, which is great because they're playing to a sold out audience of like 1,000 people, whereas I'm playing to like 10 kids in a basement. So that kind of exposure is super cool. But yeah, just basically taking everything I learned from DIY and applying it to the nonprofit. Live streams obviously is the new gig, which You know, you get to watch your favorite band play from the comfort of your living room on your phone or whatever. The very worst part about all of this is how open-ended it is. The fact that nobody knows when this is over or that there's no clear end in sight. That, I think, is the worst part, because unfortunately bands and booking agents and everybody are scrambling to reschedule things for later in the year. So just like the overall feeling of all of this, the uncertainty, it's just so devastating. I don't know, like I kind of am going through an identity crisis because I don't really know what I am or who I am without this gigantic piece of my life now just taken away, you know? So it's like I'm trying to like find other things to keep me occupied and busy. Like we want to be going to shows and I don't know. So I'm just super bummed that there's no clear, definitive answer of when this will be over and we can go back to normal.
For the foreseeable future, of course, music venues will continue to be closed and musicians will have to find different methods to share their work. Okay, from the performing arts to the visual arts, outdoor murals have heavily impacted our community over the past decade. In this next mini-documentary called The Missing Muralists, student producers Christian Robinson, Landon Roberts, and Veronica Campbell explore how the Richmond Mural Project impacted local artists.
What does street art mean to you personally?
Street art is a visual form of a community expressing itself. So it's the most individual way that people can participate in the visual landscape surrounding them and surrounding the people that they know.
Street art is open, it's informal. Everybody sees it that goes by that street, and it's an opportunity to create like interventions into people's lives.
You don't get a lot of choices about what the place around you looks like, but street art is one of the avenues that you can actually impact the way your community looks.
You don't want to not have an identity, right? And we had an identity that we did not all of us wanted to deal with before this street art thing happened. I think what street art is doing for the city is recontextualizing our kind of context in the world. We are a public art city, and people take pride in that.
For the people that are interested in moving forward and creating a new identity for Richmond, street art is sort of something to move towards. Artistic expression is something to move towards and away from more complicated issues of the past identities that Richmond has had.
And do you think that the Richmond Mural Project kind of helped to create this new identity for Richmond?
Street art was boosted in a big way and foisted upon Richmond as an identity. I think it was a somewhat manufactured identity because of this project.
I think the blend between what happened with that Richmond Mural Project with Art Wino and what is happening here locally, they're interdependent and created the economy that we have now. I think that if the Richmond Mural Project didn't do what they did, we'd have a harder time supporting as many street artists as we do. Richmond needed to see that these pieces could become iconic and that they were attractive for business owners. And once we had those international artists come and raise the bar, that made us raise the bar.
And they said that, a lot of really good artists were coming to the city. I was excited about that. I got to meet a lot of those people. It was a good and a bad thing, man. It's so weird. I have such mixed feelings about the Richmond Mural Project. Shout out Shane, I met him, he's the owner and stuff, and he got a lot of flack for doing the Richmond Mural Project here. In fact, I don't even know if he curates art anymore.
Can you tell me a little bit more about him? I'm assuming you're talking about Shane.
Shane, yes. I only know him from what I've heard about him, and then I went to he was doing a presentation at Spark because he wanted another wave of murals to come in. So I went to listen to him to find out, how he's able to do that. And he did a presentation, and it was a really good sales pitch, is all it turns out to be. He talked with passion, and he talked about how the murals made a difference in a community and this and that. But the whole time I was listening to him, knowing that somehow you're benefiting from this.
He was a big collector, and he had money. And when I first got to know him, he kind of helped me out in a lot of ways, like during that initial Richmond mural project, I was like, I want to meet the guy that's running this. And I was a new artist at the time. I had just done like one piece around here, I was like, I need to work for you, man, like blah, blah, blah. And he was like, I like your audacity. So he opened up a bunch of avenues for me to like paint in DC as well. So I don't know, like with that, my idea of his character is a little skewed because like, I look at that in that time and, I really pay tribute to that. But most of the time, I think it's reputation for him. He's trying to cover his ass, Like, if you don't have a good reputation as a curator, you can't sell art, And that's what he was trying to do. He was buying a lot of art and selling art. He would have a lot of gallery events up in DC, these walls, like, having influence in smaller cities surrounding DC area, He was like the dude, but,
As far as I know, this was Shane's way of leveraging his position in order to meet artists that he thought were interesting or inspirational to him, that he was like using this as a platform for him to like fanboy.
From my perspective, I think that he goes to towns to put these murals up on the wall to serve as billboards for his artists that he represents.
There wasn't a lot of pressure put on the local artist question until I believe Michael Broth started pushing it as a question. I think it might have been in the third year. He might have started earlier than that, I would hope, but after that point, Art Wino and Shane were like, okay, well, we gotta like nip this in the bud, so we'll include an artist next year, a local artist, just to like be able to say in publications that we're including a local artist. It's not exclusive, but it is like using a huge amount of Richmond's money to do, and not returning any of that to the community. It was just, disappointing. I think he recognizes that it's bad press to not include local artists in a festival named after a city. I think having it be like a designated slot for a local artist was the most insulting part, because it was like a tokenism of sort. It was like, okay, we'll have just a little bit of space for somebody local to be like represented here. It wasn't in any way like acknowledging that anybody here was worth providing a space for.
I didn't know that they weren't including local Richmond artists. They got a couple in there. I think Nils did a piece, I'm pretty sure, and maybe Jacob Eveland, right? It's Nils and Jacob. Yeah. I know that they did pieces. It's kind of tragic that they didn't include a lot of the other like really good artists in the city, like completely apart from myself, like so many good artists,
They could have included more local artists. There's great local artists here, or at least gave us a presentation like they gave the one that I saw at Spark, to let the artist here know why they were not going to include the local artist.
I feel like as a local artist, it was a slight to be taken out of that media spotlight, because we can do a lot of work here but we didn't have the media paying attention in the same way, which is kind of how our names get established. We work differently than studio artists because it's really about how social media kind of represents what we do, and that's how we get more work. People see us from other towns and will bring us to those other towns.
Not only do I think there are plenty of mural artists in Richmond that could have created artwork on par with the international and national artists, I also think that there are a lot of painters and other artists who had never painted a mural before, that this could have been a really incredible moment for them to get the opportunity to paint a mural, to work on a much, much larger scale.
The Richmond artists know the history of Richmond, know how it feels right now, we know what it is right now, so we're able, and we're here right now. So our thoughts about Richmond and the site-specific nature of a mural would be in the same thought quadrant as someone walking around looking at it.
So how do you think that the Richmond Mural Project would have been different if only local artists were included?
I think that if only local artists were used for the Richmond Mural Project, we'd have a phenomenally deep resource of imagery created by local people that I don't know what that would look like, and nobody knows what that would look like because it simply hasn't happened.
The Richmond Mural Project took place from 2012 to 2017 and has given local artists a platform to expand the city's artistic identity. Okay, well that's it for another edition of VCU In Depth. I'm Bill Oglesby. Thanks for joining us.